Hey y'all, this is the second video that we have of the icon sets. I had shown you guys how I started off making my shapes out of, or making my icons out of basic shapes, and then used the shape builder tool and the pathfinder tool and the pen tool to basically create my shapes. I posted my icons for you guys to see on Saturday, but I told you guys that I would show you a couple of ways to add gradient and texture without using the really easy tools to use in Illustrator to do that. One of the reasons that I think we're having you do this in this project is so that you have the chance to see kind of how it works to do something from scratch, so that you understand how to use the tools effectively and the little shortcuts that Illustrator provides. So I wanted to start off by telling you I'm kind of cracking up. So you hear the save often, save always. I had a lot of projects open for clients and different things, as well as these icon sets, and my computer crashed. And all I had left was the JPEGs that I saved to post on Saturday. So I had to run back in and recreate just a couple of them. So I'm not going to show you all the icons. You can see that I finished the shading and stuff. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. And then you'll be able to kind of see how I did it. And we'll go from there. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about through first. Before I showed you the different ways to add texture and shading to your icons. The first thing is you guys have shown some awesome icon ideas and sets in the peer review and in the Facebook threads that you posted for me to review. I'll be doing that review video either tonight or first thing tomorrow morning, and posting that for those who wanted a review of their draft from me. But you're doing a great job. Illustrator is not easy. Several of you mentioned in notes when you submitted your worksheet that the program was giving you fits and the project was hard. And actually, even though it was difficult, you guys did an excellent job. So don't feel down and out. Illustrator is not easy to master. The first thing that I wanted to talk through was how I ended up with my icon set. I wanted to show you some different looks of icons and then provide you with how I kind of meshed them from one look to another. So that's one of the great things about Illustrator. You can morph things really quickly and easily to give you two very different looks. So if you look at the icon set on the right, it almost looks like clip art. There's more colors in every single image than just one. If you look on the left, you have a very much more traditional look of icon art, the very simplistic lines, less color. As far as the sake of this project, I'm really looking to look at both. I'll talk about sharp lines and things like that. But either one's totally acceptable in my mind. You're seeing a lot more in industry, on websites, and in all types of communication projects. There's a lot more that looks like the images on the right appearing than we've seen in the past. So just know that, I mean, if you're traditional old school designer, you'll say, oh no, icon sets are definitely more like the ones on the left. However, more general themes or more general trends are showing that the ones on the right are very, very well accepted and very well noticed as icons as well. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is how the case against stroke. I noticed that some of you guys are using stroke in your outlines. I did that, and I noticed after I did it, it was a little bit deceiving. But I wanted to give you a case for stroke. Lots of professional designers don't use a black outline like that. It feels very juvenile. So if it's a look that you're looking for, by all means use stroke. These icons that I designed, I wanted it to have a very young and playful feel. And then I also use stroke to my advantage. So we talk about adding texture or highlighting a little bit of the piece. And if you'll notice, maybe zoom in big so you can see it. If you notice, I take the stroke of my image and I just slightly offset it. If you look on this VW van, goodness, every time I scroll in, it jumps. You can see that I offset my entire stroke to the right and up. So if you imagine for a second, instead of using a drop shadow or going in and highlighting a bunch of different stuff. Let me use my pencil so I can actually just draw this in for you. If you imagine what we learned in the photography about how light's hitting an object. So imagine that here is my light source. And the light's coming this way onto the project and maybe a little bit like this. So imagine there's more lights here. It's not very good lights, but you get the idea of the light bulb. So the light's coming in at an angle. And so seeing that you know that, then you can see why I used my stroke to my advantage. I went ahead and colored the image straight behind one upon another, and then I just selected the entire stroke, deselected all my color shapes, and then grouped my stroke together. So some of these lines, like this line is separate. I didn't actually expand all of them. And then I just used my arrow keys on the keyboard to move it up and over so that you could create this look on each of the windows to kind of give you that idea that there's a glare on the glass and that you can see some dimension to the tire and kind of an edge of where, you know, it kind of shapes out a little bit on that VW bug. You'll notice though that even when I use that stroke to my advantage, it still does make my design a little bit more juvenile. But that's okay if that's kind of the look. If you're looking for something a little bit more casual and a little bit more friendly, it's totally a good look. You'll notice though that every single icon is done the same distance. And the way that I do that, I've done enough of them like this that I select my stroke and I go, let's see, I think it's 3 up and 4 over to give that look so that you'd see the light as if the light was coming down this direction from the top right corner. And you'll notice that you see that it's a little bit more difficult to see on these the pine trees with the mountain. And then on this map, it's a little bit difficult. If I was going to go back in and refine this, which I definitely would need to do, I would probably take this green edge and just shorten it up just a little bit so that it would create that white space for me. But you can see that that's one way. That's a very strong case for stroke, is if you're going to add stroke, to go ahead and use it to your advantage. So either to add dimension, to give it a more playful feel, but that's something as a designer that you would need to communicate with your client. So stroke in the general sense, just using a thin black line like that is considered a little bit not as highbrow, I guess. But let me show you really quick another option for this. So I'll just show you really quickly how I do the stroke. Here's my mountain, and basically what I've done is I've taken this outline and then I select it all and I cut and paste it in front. So Command C, Command F, and then I go ahead and select the image, and you can see right here my snow cap is just that arch. So I'm going to have to take my pen tool and go in and go ahead and connect that to be a full piece. And then I'm just going to change that to be the color of my artboard, which is white. And then this bottom piece I'm going to select to be the color of my mountain, which is brown. And then I'm going to select those two pieces and group them together because you don't want those to shift. Then I go up to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. Then I go ahead and select my stroke, and I went up, or I lied, up 4 and over. Oh, it is up 2 and over like 3. You can see you just adjust it to fit the kind of look that you're looking for, but that's exactly how I do it. So that's one really strong case. I design by stroke and then add my colors in. And you saw I started with shapes. When I was making the camera, I started with filled shapes, and that's how I get the silhouette look. Then once I have the whole shape combined, I go ahead and change it to a stroke and then save that stroke. And the other way to add dimension, if you're not interested in using a stroke, would be to go ahead and add in that same type of glare, like the sun flare kind of look that's created here, but to do it with the pen tool. So this on the interstate symbol is kind of a poor example of it, but I'll show you what I would do. I go ahead and select my pen tool. I use white for almost all my glares. Sometimes people will use the exact same color but in a darker shade, so I'll show you what that looks like too. But I would just select my pen tool and go in over the top of my shape, and the same thing, remember I'm paying attention to my lights coming from the top right hand corner. Click off that handlebar so I can get a real skinny fill, and then just adjust your handlebars until it's a shape that you're happy with. You could just leave it white, but that seems very stark and unrealistic. And so what I do is I go in and I mess with the transparency of that white image And I just use my slider. So I just go up to window, down to transparency, use my slider. I think I kind of like it at 35. So then you would have this, and you can see if I change the color, if I wanted it darker, you could add a gray. But remember, every time you select a different color, you'll have to go back and play with the transparency. So window, transparency, because it will readjust to whatever you clicked on. And you can see, so you see it fine up here. You can do gray, you can do whatever color you'd like. Shadow, if you look at it in photographs or in real life, shadow is not black. Illustrator and Photoshop and everybody gives you a black as like the basic for a shadow, but it's not. So if you're going to draw on shadows and use an actual darker color, my suggestion would be to go into your color palette and select something that's kind of like a muddy brown color, because that's actually the color that real shadows are. That gives a more realistic look. So for example, on this bus, let's see if I can actually do this. Let's use the mountain just because it's a little bit more effective. Let me get another white piece for us to look at. This mountain, let's say that I've decided to keep my stroke because that's the look that I want. And this mountain, I want to give it a little bit of a circle so that it feels like it's sitting on a horizon rather than just being a white shape. I would come in here and pick the ellipsis tool, and I would draw just a little bit of an ellipse, and then I come into my color fill, and I always go down into the orange reds because these browns seem to be a little bit richer. I pick fairly dark, pretty close to black most of the time. And you can see that doesn't look very attractive. I'd move it to the back. Sorry. Move it to the back. And then I'd select that transparency, and the same thing, I go up to the ellipse and I move the transparency down just a little bit. And then I might also take and just kind of adjust just a little. Might be slightly off center to give the fill that the sun would be facing. Let's see, if the sun's coming in from the right, we're going to need to move it to expand a little bit to the left. So it gives the idea that it's kind of coming over the mountains and giving you that fill. One way to kind of make that shadow not perfectly round, because there's no way in real life that that would happen, if you use, okay, so you go right here to the width tool, and in the drop down, there's the warp tool, and it's a circle, and you just kind of push along the edge, and you can see that it's going to affect my ellipsis, but you can see right here, it's pushing up my mountain, and I don't want to do that. So before you use that tool, you'll want to drag your ellipse back out, and then use your warp tool to kind of give it, you can pull it down a little bit to kind of give it that odd shape so it doesn't look like a perfect circle. And then you'll drop it in to give the effect of kind of a ground, to give you a horizon line. So that's another option as well. Finally, to go back to the more traditional icon look, one thing that I notice is that a lot of your icons right now are a big variety of sizes. And I want you to pay attention. If you're doing two items in real life and one is smaller than the other, then you're going to need to keep that in mind. But you also want to make sure that all your icons are clear and concise. So that's another thing that I wanted to show you. As I change between the two icon styles, for example, this mountain with the trees is almost impossible if I'm working just with stroke. So then I have to decide, is a mountain or is the pine trees more indicative of what I'm trying to portray? In my travel icon set, I wanted to portray the idea of traveling to the mountains. And so obviously I chose the mountain rather than the trees. But it's the same way with the sun and the waves. When it's a dual color icon and I have more to work with, this allows me to use more color so I can use both. But when I ended up trying to portray the beach, I went ahead and said, okay, I'll use the waves because that's universal. Everybody knows what wave stands for. I did choose orange instead of blue not because I didn't think the waves would look good on blue, but because I wanted to give that aspect of the idea of like summertime at the beach as opposed to wintertime at the beach, if that makes any sense. But I want to show you how I went ahead and did these drop shadows with the pen tool on the circle. So first of all, I would just create my 6 circles, and I would make sure they're all the same size. So I would draw one out by holding down the shift key as I drag, and then I would just Control C, Control F, and then Control D to make another one, and I drag it, Control C, Control F, Control D. So I'd have my 6, and then I grab all of those, Control C, Control F, Control D, and then I'd have my 6. And then I'd use them all to align so that it was all perfect on my artboard. So that way you kind of have the idea of what I would do to get my circles all the same. And then I just use my color picker to get the different colors. Then to show you how I went ahead and did the shadow. And I'm going to show you, I did not choose a second set of colors for these icons for the shadows. Instead, I'll show you how I chose those. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the shadowing here. And this time my light is coming this direction. So from the top left corner. So I'm going to drag my shadows that direction. So I use my pen tool. And for me, I always start and work my way around the circle in the middle because that seems to be easier. So right now, it's just on the stroke. I want to make sure that it is on the fill because that's easier. So I just click. I want to make sure that my actual icon stroke isn't selected, but I'm going to use my pen tool. And if the light's coming down, it's not going to go straight out here. Instead, it's going to go down just a little bit. So then I click onto the arrow, and then I just click on my points and drag. It seems like you should be able to do a half circle without any issues with the pen tool, but it's actually easier if you break it up into segments. And you'll work your way around. This dot is probably a little high, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm just going to take it up to the top of the mountain, and then I'm going to drop it back down. Now, because my stroke, I'm going to go ahead and select my shadow, and I'm going to send it to back, and then I'm going to select my circle and send that to back. And then this is going to be green. So for a second, I'm going to select my shadow. I'm going to go ahead and pick the same color green. Then I'm going to go into my color fill palette, and I'm going to select a much darker green here. And again, I'm going to work with the transparency. So window, transparency. And I'm going to just take my opacity slider and move it down. Here I like it a little bit darker than probably what I chose before. I think I'm going to leave it at 38. And then I'm going to go in and fine tune. You can see as if I highlight this shadow, you can see that I don't match up with the icon circle. So what I'm going to do is take my direct select tool, which is the filled in arrow, and I'm going to tap twice, and I can adjust the handlebar is one way. So in and out's going to give you either a fatter belly or a slimmer belly. And then you can see I'm going to need to pull this down just a little bit to get it as close to the edge as possible. Now I wanted to show you down here. You can see my point now is off the actual circle. So I'm going to take my direct selection tool again, the filled in arrow. I'm going to double click it. If I use the arrows on my keyboard, you can see that I can go in, out. And sometimes that works even a little bit easier. But you just keep working with it until you get it to where it needs to be. That looks pretty good. And then the same thing, I just adjust this until it kind of clips right in to where it needs to be. The same thing, because my icon is just a stroke, this image back in here should be the same color as the shadow, if that makes sense. Okay, let me show you one more time on this red interstate sign. So I'm going to go ahead and select the red, and I'm going to go in and pick a darker color just to start with, and use my pen tool. And then essentially all I'm going to do, that light's still coming in the same direction from the top left, so I'm going to start in this top corner. It's obviously not going to start showing up until closer to the bottom. But I'm going to pretend like my icon's almost a wire frame. So I'm going to click there to extend one handlebar off. Then I'm going to do a steeper line and just work my way around the circle. And the light's going to come down this way, so I'm going to stop a little bit steeper than I did the last time. And I'm just going to click through and basically just draw my lines to kind of stay within the middle of where my wire icon strokes are. So then I'm just going to highlight that, send it to back, then send my circle back. You can see it jutted off just a little bit. This one's not quite as bad. So again, window, transparency, and then I just take it down. I think we did 38. But that gives a very uniform look. You can see this one's much steeper on the shadow than on the mountain. So I would just go back in with my direct select tool, and I would make sure that I adjust so that I have a steeper angle here, so that when I turn it in for grading, my professor says, hey, you did a great job adding your gradients and your shadowing, and they're all consistent. So hopefully that's helpful. And it kind of gives you an idea of how to work through those icons. I made myself a list up here on the top. Let me check to make sure. Okay, things that I'm looking for the project. First of all, for me to give you full points, like I said in the announcement today, I need you to make sure that you fulfill the requirements for the icon set that are outlined in the project. I also need you to turn in the project report for both the parts 1 and part 2. And then obviously I need you to make sure that you participate in the critique amongst your peers and that kind of thing. Then we covered the 3 ways to add definition. Pay attention to how the light would be in real life. We talked about that, using brown as your shadow, or darkening up the colors if you're going to give a drop shadow like I did in the more traditional set of icons. And then I talked to you about a case for using stroke. If you are going to use a stroke in a colored setting, let me show you. One way to do this, I'll show you on this darker blue, is to basically select the outside, the darker blue, and then click your stroke and go to the stroke of it. And then you'll want to increase your line. So you would go window and down to stroke, and then increase your line here. Let's see, there we go. And then you'd want to fill the top, if that makes any sense. So the line on the outside of this, maybe even show you on the mountain if that makes it easier. So you'd want to take your stroke here, and you'd want to turn it brown. And then you'd want to increase its size. And that could give you just a little bit of definition as well. But you'd also want to make sure, like I did, I just made that snow cap. I drew it in with the pen tool. So you'd need to make sure that that snow cap image has the same kind of stroke, and turn off the fill so that you have that kind of same look. And that's another really great way to add some definition. But my suggestion is that don't use black, use a darker color of the color you're outlining. So if I was using a sun, if I was making my sunshine, I would basically cut and paste another one and even slightly offset it. And then I would turn that one darker still. So it kind of gives you that outline to give some dimension for your sunshine. Or I would actually turn this to have a stroke. And then I'd go in and select a slightly darker and then increase your stroke quite a bit. to give you that vibe. So hopefully that helps. Other than that, I think I've covered everything. Again, sorry that I ended up doing this video a little bit late. Obviously, guys, save while you work, because when your computer crashes and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have that due in a couple of minutes, I will totally feel for you, because that totally happened to me when I was creating these icons. I lost my art file, and so I had to come back in and create a couple of things and just show you my JPEGs. So if you've got questions, shoot me an email, ask on the Facebook group, and see if we can't all help each other learn together. So you guys are doing great. I'm looking forward to seeing your final projects.